Did you know there are over 3,000 questions in the Bible? Lately, I've been thinking a lot about one of my favorite ones. It was asked by one of the most infamous world leaders at one of the most famous trials in world history. He asked the defendant the question. He asked, "What is truth?" What is truth? Does the word even have a place in a conversation that's connected to the Bible? Again, inside or outside of the Bible, what is truth? It's a fascinating question in 2023. We're going to explore the answer today.
Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes.
People who know me will often hear me admit I am a bookaholic and a word nerd. One of many ways I show that is how fascinated and excited I get when the world's most popular English dictionaries release their word of the year from the previous year. The prominence of words like those can show significant things about a culture. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about a link between one dictionary's 2019 word of the year and another dictionary's word from 2016. When I slow down long enough to really think about a lot of things that have happened since 2019, I see all kinds of illustrations of the impact of 2016's word. That year, the people behind the Oxford Dictionary declared the International English Word of the Year was post-truth. That means some of the most passionate experts in the English language and culture said the compound word post-truth captured something that became exceptionally common and influential in 2016. They said being in a post-truth time in history means objective facts are less influential than appeals to emotion and personal belief. You need to think about a statement like that for a little while in order to start to really feel the weight of it. Objective facts are less influential than appeals to emotion and personal belief. The Oxford word experts pointed out how even the prefix post, as in post-truth, has morphed over the past few years, saying, rather than simply referring to a time after a specified situation or event, as in post-war, the prefix post has a meaning more like belonging to a time in which the specified concept has become unimportant or irrelevant. Now think about that. 7 years ago, the word of the year was chosen because top word and culture experts had observed truth had become unimportant or irrelevant because objective facts are less influential than appeals to emotion and personal belief. That statement came in 2016. Think about it midway through 2023. Has truth become unimportant or irrelevant because objective facts are less influential than appeals to emotion and personal belief? Well, hold on to that as we turn briefly to the 2019 word of the year from the people behind the Merriam-Webster dictionary. We're not going to spend any time exploring it today. I just want to try to show how it illustrates a graphic reality of post-truth culture. Again, post-truth was the 2016 word of the year from the people behind the Oxford Dictionary. The people behind the Merriam-Webster dictionary said the 2019 word of the year was the word they, specifically as it came to be used to refer to one person whose gender identity is non-binary, that is, and the quote continues, relating to or being a person who identifies with or expresses a gender identity that is neither entirely male nor entirely female. They was the 2019 word of the year. Straining to understand it more midway through 2023, my learnaholic tendencies had me digging into the Gay, Straight, and Lesbian Education Network. It was founded by a group of teachers in 1990 who, in their words, believe they play, and this is a quote from them, they play key roles in creating affirming learning environments for LGBTQ youth. And now they coordinate a network of 43 chapters in 30 states across the country. Now, take the words of the year from 2016 and 2019 and consider them in light of these words that came from one of the core beliefs of the Gay, Straight, and Lesbian Education Network. Again, this is an extended quote. Gender identity is how you see yourself at your core. Everyone gets to decide their gender identity for themselves, and this designation can also change over time. You may identify as a girl or boy, a woman or man, or you might identify as agender, genderqueer, non-binary, or just as a person. You may choose not to use any specific term to define your gender identity, or you may use a term today that you decide later doesn't fit. Everyone can identify however feels right to them. I've read that many times, and each time I can sense people I know and love seeing or hearing it and thinking, oh, finally, someone gets me. And I can sense people I know and love seeing or hearing it and thinking or saying, maybe even a little angrily, that is crazy. Where your thoughts are on that doesn't change the reality of the influence of it at this point in history in 2023. But what does it even mean to say 2023? Where did that form of measuring time come from? Does it even matter anymore? Well, it definitely mattered to the exceedingly influential Pope 1,500 years ago, who commissioned a prominent monk to determine the date for Easter, the date of the execution of Jesus of Nazareth. That monk did what the Pope asked, and for the first time, history was divided between BC and AD. Billions of the 100 billion or so people who have lived since then believed the birth of Jesus of Nazareth was so extraordinarily significant, it separated human history into BC and AD. BC, before Christ, AD, Anno Domini, the year our Lord was born. Now, many people are less convinced about that than ever, and some have changed BC and AD to BCE and simply CE, before the Common Era and the Common Era. And notice the word common replaced the word Christ. A survey by the Gallup poll people showed that in the United States, for the first time ever, more people believe the Bible is a book of fables, legends, history, and moral precepts recorded by man than those who believe it is the actual Word of God. In the context of all we've touched on so far, the best-selling biography of Jesus contains a blunt and bold statement that jolts me more than ever as I consider it in light of a post-truth culture. Jesus claimed, "I am the real truth and the only way to God." Now, that sounded as crazy to most people then as it does today, and it was just as politically incorrect then as it is today. Another biographer recalled the time Jesus hit him and a growing group of others with a question that ended up turning their worlds upside down. Their answer meant death for many of them. It still means death for many depending on how they answer it. Jesus asked, "Who do you say I am?" C.S. Lewis, one of the most famous writers in history, said anyone who said what Jesus did would either be a lunatic, on the level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. He continued, either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. Jesus' question echoes in the background of those words from C.S. Lewis. Who do you say I am? A form of that question was asked musically for 150 Christmases before our Western culture was labeled post-truth. I think of the opening line to the song, and the question takes me back to a makeshift baby's crib in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. What child was that? A man named William Dix wrote the song, What Child Is This?, in 1865. William Dix had been a successful insurance salesman in Scotland, but a serious illness made him unable to get out of bed for months. One of the few things that brought him any relief was writing poetry. A lot of what he wrote helped him wrestle with some of his deepest questions. As with many in Scotland, Dix's childhood had been full of stories about Jesus. Being confronted with his own mortality made the question more real than ever. Who was Jesus? Really? Who is Jesus? Really? As much as anything, William Dix read the 4 biographies of Jesus written by and titled Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're in the mini library called the Bible. I say this as neutrally as I can, as a former news reporter, researcher, word nerd, and bookaholic. I have not found anything that has been tested like the Bible, and I don't know of anything that has withstood the tests that it has. I don't believe the Bible is just some religious or mystical book written apart from world history. To the contrary, I believe it is a part of history, describing and verifying some of the most significant events in world history. That's one of many things that concern me so much about the 2016 Word of the Year. The way many people feel about the Bible keeps them from even considering what it says. I've had people show a lot of feelings and even call me nasty names when I say 2 of the books in the Bible were written after one of the most extensive yet risky research projects in history, headed up by a man who was considered a brilliant scientist and a doctor. And in the introduction to his report, that man, named Luke, wrote, "Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They use the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theophilus, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught." Now, by the time Luke wrote that, he was putting his life at risk doing it. That's one of many reasons the story should have died with Jesus, or soon after. If his disciples had just followed their emotions, they never would have spread his story the way they did. One report estimates 70 million people have been martyred throughout history for believing and or saying Jesus was and is who he claimed to be. Even the history of the word martyr validates the truth of the story. Before Jesus was born, the word for martyr referred to a witness or someone who testified. After Jesus died, it began to only describe people who testified what they believed about him. And people began to be executed for that. Horribly creative ways were developed to torture and kill martyrs. See, you might get a handful of people to die for something they're very emotional about. But there must be more than that behind 70 million people spread over 2,000 years all around the world, willing to die rather than turn from what they believe about Jesus. Even if you rarely go to church, but watch TV in December, you will likely recognize one part of what Luke reported, a key part of the truth the Bible claims. Many people know it because it's been read in a unique way on prime-time television for 57 years, despite some of the best efforts of some of the most passionate anti-God forces. I wonder how many people have only heard this portion of this much of the Bible being read, and only know it in the voice of the cartoon character Linus. That night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared among them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. They were terrified, but the angel reassured them. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth, lying in a manger." Suddenly the angel was joined by a vast host of others, the armies of heaven, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in highest heaven, and peace on earth to those with whom God is pleased." As memorable as that has become because of the way Linus has done it for 57 years, it can make you miss how overwhelming the actual scene would have been, and how spectacular the announcement was. Just think about some of the words in there. Suddenly, radiance, glory surrounded all. Armies of heaven, terrified, great joy. Talk about a birth announcement. Centuries earlier, a man named Isaiah was one of several who predicted it. And in one of his predictions, he used a word that doesn't appear in any ancient writings before his. The word Emmanuel. It meant God with us. Most people don't realize some of what Isaiah wrote was in the form of a song. And most people don't know music was much more than art back then. Actually, much of what we consider arts was more than what we think of when we read or view or listen to it. For centuries, art, music, was a way of telling and teaching and recording history. Over 1,200 years ago, a group of monks wrote what turned into a song, but it was their way of documenting what they believed to be truth, while pleading for a deeper experience of the reality of it. We know the song as O come, Emmanuel." God, please come, please be with us. As with many Christmas songs, I don't think that one should be limited to a few weeks out of the year. However, it has come to be linked to the point in history when God came to be with people in a way he never had before. The announcement was made to shepherds, about as far down the social ladder as you could get back then. Nonetheless, even they would have known key parts of their history. The hundreds of times their most cherished books of truth predicted the coming Messiah, the ultimate rescuer. No story or painting could capture how unexpected and astonishing it would have been to have the stillness of the Palestinian countryside shattered and to look up and hear the proclamation of God with them, and then to go and try to get their minds around the thought of God with them in a baby's body in a common unclean animal's food bin. It sounded insane then. I don't know if it sounds any more sane today. Here, now, Emmanuel, God with us. Really? Is that true? Can we be sure? I've spent countless hours studying the first time the Bible shows Satan asking questions like that. I believe it was deeper than what appears in most modern English translations, which have Satan asking the first human beings, "Did God really say?" The key word in that question was God. And it seems Satan asked it with a mocking sneer, kind of like, "God?" As if to challenge Adam and Eve. You think he's God? And he quickly followed that with, what kind of a God would keep anything from you? And Satan's question got them to shift their attention from what they knew to what they felt, as they stood in the center of what was quite literally paradise. We're told she saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious. Remember what we saw earlier from 2016? Post-truth means objective facts are less influential than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Now, please don't hear me saying emotions don't or shouldn't have a part in an authentic pursuit of God and or His truth. In his book, Yawning at Tigers, Drew Dick wrote about what can happen to the way we even think about God when emotions are removed from what we believe. And Drew Dick wrote, "We neither tremble in fear nor thrill with excitement at the prospect of encountering this wild deity. We give mere mental assent to truths that should leave us shaking." The thing is, feelings can be good windows to show what's going on deep inside of us, but feelings are often really bad leaders. Most of the messes or trouble we get in happens because we just follow our feelings. And without holding them up to truth, feelings can make lousy leaders. I believe post-truth is just a version of the same strategy the deceiver has used since he slithered into this world in Eden. Go to the part of the Bible just before Eve saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious. For a moment, try to just use your thoughts, your brain. Try to think of an amazing, flawless place, untouched by any sin. Try to imagine being there and knowing Emmanuel, God is with you. And he tells you, freely eat of every tree. And imagine looking all around and you've explored enough to know you're in this huge place. Some historians say Eden was at least as big as California. Now, think again about being told you get to eat freely from every tree. And then, for reasons only he knows, God told them about one foundational truth he included in creation. Freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, by the way, I believe God's desire and design was to teach them about good and evil at some point. But it was to be done his way and in his time. Part of what they did was follow their own timing and their own way. As Eve looked at that one tree, and as Adam looked at Eve, they let their feelings overrule what they knew. Again, feelings are not automatically bad. God included them in the design. God designed us with taste buds and with nerve endings. And we don't know how long Adam and Eve had to freely enjoy everything in Eden, including one another. And I try to imagine how all of that would have felt to all of their senses, but without even a hint of sin. Have you ever been watching a movie when things get to a crucial moment? Maybe it's a movie you've seen several times, and things are getting to that critical moment, and one of the heroes is about to do something really dumb, and you're so into it, you kind of yell at the screen like, "No!" Even though I've read Genesis 3 hundreds of times, I get to where Eve has fruit juice dripping down her chin, and it says, she gave some to her husband who was with her. And here's where I want to scream, "No, Adam, you know the truth. You got it straight from God. Say something." But it tells us he ate it too. Again, feelings can make really lousy leaders. As their feelings got them to turn from the truth, what they believed about it kept twisting, and so did their emotions. But they had already learned to follow their feelings. And pride led to fear, which led to shame, which further twisted what they believed. And it got them to think they could hide from God. Worse yet, they believed they had to hide from God. But instead of slipping into the bushes, what do you think God would have done if they had turned to him and said, "We blew it. We got totally sucked in. We ignored what we knew about you, and we broke your rule. Will you forgive us?" Based on what you know about God, what do you think he would have done? Based on what you know about God, what do you think he would do if you were to turn to him with whatever mess you've made or whatever mess you were pulled into? And even though they didn't do that, we have one of the most beautiful pictures of God in what is often an overlooked part of the story. It came after God explained the truth for them and for us because of what they did. You can read it in Genesis chapter 3, verses 14 through 19, for a summary of what everyone has to live with in one way or another here between Eden and heaven. But look at something most people don't even know is in the Bible. What God did before sending them out of Eden. Genesis 3:21 tells us, God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins, and God clothed them. Notice, God made. He took the initiative. God clothed them. The original wording gives a sense of God doing it carefully and tenderly. I love the image it creates of God with them. Although it's more than my 3-pound brain can handle, I believe the same Emmanuel who was there with them is here right now. Here with me, there with you. And what he offered them is the same today. On their own, Adam and Eve tried to make coverings with leaves. God made it clear that was not going to cover enough. He made garments of skins from an animal or animals. That meant blood and death. The first recorded death in human history. Sacrificial, despite innocence. To cover their shame, their fear, their guilt, their sin. Does that sound familiar? It should if you've ever celebrated Easter. Do you remember earlier when I mentioned the biographer Luke? He wrote a lot about the arrest and the trial and the torture and the execution of Jesus and his resurrection. Think about that as you think about what he wrote, as we saw in the introduction to the biography. He said, many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They used eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. Remember, Jesus said, I am the real truth and the only way to God. Remember what C.S. Lewis wrote about how anyone who said what Jesus did would either be a lunatic or else he would be the devil of hell. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. Oh, you can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon. Or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. And Jesus' question echoes in the background of those words from Lewis. Who do you say he is? What do you think he says about you? Why? Do you have any idea how much he wants you to know how real he really is?
Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, vast, unmeasured, boundless, free, rolling as a mighty ocean in its fullness over me, underneath me, all around me is the current of thy love, leading onward to my glorious rest above. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, spread his praise from shore to shore. How he loveth, ever loveth, changeth never, nevermore. How he watches o'er his loved ones, died to call them all his own. How for them he intercedeth, watcheth o'er them from the throne. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, love of every love the best. 'Tis an ocean vast of blessing, 'tis a haven sweet of rest.